Hi everyone and welcome back to the podcast. I'm again recording this at my boyfriend's house. If you can hear construction, he lives next to a lot of construction. Okay, it shouldn't be too annoying, but if you hear a digger every now and then or some beeping truck, like that, that's why. It shouldn't be too bad, but just some context if you can hear that. Let's just all ignore it together, okay? So I just want to get straight into it with this episode. I have a lot to say. I'm talking about a very interesting topic, so I'm not going to just yap about myself at the start. Today I wanted to record an episode talking about cognitive dissonance because I've known about this, what it kind of is for a while, but I've become very interested in it recently. It's just one of the most interesting things ever, right? If you're interested in psychology or just people in general, this is just so interesting, okay? So cognitive dissonance, let's define it at the start so we all know what we're talking about. Cognitive dissonance is when there's an inconsistency between your self-concept and a behaviour of yours, and it causes you a mental disturbance, right? For example, maybe you hold an opinion that people should not smoke. Smoking is bad for you, smoking is not something people should do, you don't like it, but you're a smoker, right? You're contradicting yourself. That's an example of cognitive dissonance. You know, things like this will cause an inner conflict, right? Because you're contradicting your own morals, opinions, and beliefs. You know, it causes a mental disturbance when we have a strong opinion or a belief and we're not following and acting in that way, right? And this is something that we as people do frequently. Obviously, we're going to have opinions and we're not going to act perfectly. But I find it so interesting how we respond to this discomfort. So let's stick with the smoking example, right? You don't like smoking, you're against it, yet you smoke a pack a day, right? Let's stick with this example because I think this is quite a good one because it's probably a great example of an area a lot of people do have cognitive dissonance about because obviously we know smoking is bad for us, yet how many people smoke, right? So that can cause you some discomfort inside yourself, right? It will bother you a little bit that you're like not acting in the way that you believe is right? So your options here to deal with this discomfort, this inner conflict, your options are either to change your behaviour, right? So it aligns with your morals. So in this situation, it would be quitting smoking, right? That's obviously an option as to how you could handle this discomfort, this cognitive dissonance, is you could think, I'm feeling uncomfortable because I'm obviously contradicting my own beliefs. So I'm going to change what I'm doing so I don't have that discomfort. The discomfort would obviously leave if you quit smoking because then your behaviour is aligning with what you believe in. The other option, which is one that people take so frequently, this is probably more often what people do, definitely more often what people do, is you could change your belief. Instead of making the difficult decision to quit smoking because you believe it's wrong, you could convince yourself that it's not wrong and then you don't have to quit, right? This is like, oh my god, a genius idea to the human brain. It's like finding a loophole, right? Instead of quitting this thing that would take me a lot of work and be very difficult, but it would align with my morals more, I could just convince myself that it's okay. I could just give myself a loophole. I could tell myself that it's not that deep and I could just carry on, right? I could give myself an out. We give ourselves excuses. For example, you know smoking's wrong. You know probably it would make more sense for you to quit. However, you've had a long day. You've had a hard day. You've been through a lot. You've just got home and you're exhausted. One cigarette is not the end of the world. What's one cigarette going to do? You deserve it, right? This is what we do. We make ourselves feel better about it. And that's kind of option B as to how to handle the discomfort that we get within ourselves, is we can either change our behavior and do the right thing, or we can make ourselves feel better about it and give ourselves an excuse. Like, these are kind of your only two options. Either your actions have to change or your opinion does, right? And we as people have a difficult time changing our opinions. This is so interesting because obviously this relates to a lot bigger things, but also like the tiny things we do throughout our day that we're just kind of making little excuses about. Oh my god, we do it all the time. We do it all the time. The more I think about it, the more I can think of times where I do this. And this mental like disturbance that we feel will obviously come up a lot because we have so many opinions and so many thoughts and we do so many things in life. Obviously, sometimes we're gonna kind of clash with our own opinions or have that kind of like, oh, this feels a bit weird, I'm kind of contradicting what I've said or like what I think I believe, right? This is gonna happen. And you know, the fact that this comes up is healthy because obviously it's there because it's showing us that we're contradicting ourselves, right? It's giving us the opportunity to grow and to align our behaviour with our morals. You know, that unease is often an opportunity for you to grow and do the right thing. Like, if that didn't come up, we would never know when we were doing anything kind of right or wrong, right? It's similar to kind of having like a guilty conscience when you're doing something bad. It feels shit, but it's kind of like, it's healthy to feel bad when you're doing bad things, obviously. It kind of feels adjacent to that, where like you kind of feel that discomfort of when I've said one thing, or I think one thing and I'm doing another and it's going to make you feel weird. And that's kind of your body and your brain in a way telling you like, You've got two options here. You can either make these things align or you can make an excuse. And they're kind of your two options, right? So it's healthy and it's human to feel that disturbance. But what I find so interesting is why we so often take the option B and excuse our behaviours, right? Obviously it's more comfortable, it's going to be easier a lot of the time, it makes us feel better faster, it's that instant gratification. Example, the smoking thing. If you want a cigarette and you have had a long day, if you manage to excuse that behaviour in your head, you get the cigarette, right? So of course you're going to fucking excuse it, because if you don't get the cigarette, you won't feel that hit of like what you want to feel, right? You're going to have to be patient and get it from somewhere else, and we're not very patient as people, right? So we're kind of making excuses a lot of the time because it's easier and we can feel better faster. Often it's the brain just wanting some dopamine, wanting to be comfortable, wanting to do something that feels good. It doesn't want to wait, right? So, having one cigarette, why not? I deserve it. Having a drink tonight, why not? I deserve it. When you've told yourself you're not going to drink, do you know what I mean? Then it's going to make you feel weird. Because if you've claimed, if you've talked the talk that you're not going to drink, and then you're not walking the walk and you're having a drink, or you've said, I'm going to quit smoking, and then you go and have a cigarette, it's not going to feel good, right? Obviously, because you're saying one thing and you're doing another, and it can make us feel like shit as people. It can make you feel like a bad person if you regularly do this, which is tricky because it doesn't necessarily make you a bad person. Right, it so depends. Obviously, this is very situational. What are you doing? I don't know. I think that's an effect that it can have if you're kind of regularly ignoring the cognitive dissonance feeling and you're regularly just kind of excusing things and you're not really ever kind of sticking to your guns and what you believe and making the harder decision. It can make you just feel kind of like a bit of a rubbish person because you just feel like a bit of a fraud, right? You feel like you're saying one thing and doing another all the time, and that just makes you feel like shit. Right, you feel like a better person if you're not doing that all the time. I think it can make you feel ashamed. For example, if you hold a strong belief, people should wait to have sex before marriage. There's a belief you have, right? You don't think it's right. You think people should wait. That's your opinion. That's your moral compass, right? Think what you want. No judgment here. I don't care. But then you're going around preaching that, but you're unmarried and not a virgin, right? You will feel like a hypocrite because I guess you are a hypocrite, right? I think it makes us feel like hypocrites because we're being hypocrites. But that's such a stupid example because either, like I said, you need to change your opinion or your behavior. You can't undo, you can't undo the fact that you're not a virgin. That one's just done. But you know what I mean? If you're going around being you should do this and you should do that and you haven't done it, you should probably not be doing that, right? You will probably feel like a lesser person deep down if you don't fucking meet these standards that you're going off telling everyone. This is the thing, it's you can get this feeling from if you're someone who is preaching all these opinions and morals and you're not doing them, or even if just you have them in your brain, you just think I don't think this is right personally. You maybe haven't even told anyone, but it's just your opinion, your belief. Even if then you're just contradicting it, you'll still feel the effect of that because it's in your brain, right? You'll still have that inner conflict. I think it's probably worse if you've told people all about it, because then there's also the social element of everyone else is going to feel like I'm a fraud, not just me. But like I said earlier, I think a reason that we do this is we as people have a hard time changing our opinions. We get very set in our ways. We feel comfortable. It's kind of how we wrap our head around the world, I feel as we have opinions. And we like to kind of feel like they're solid and there's a structure and foundation. And if they're always changing and we're always learning new information and changing our opinions all the time, it's quite unsettling. I think that's why when we think something, we so often kind of stick to it because it just feels this is order, right? In a world that has no order. It feels good to just stick to what we believe. However, the issue comes when we learn new information. For example, you used to sunbathe all the time. You used to do that all the time growing up. There wasn't so much research on it. You didn't know how bad it was for you. And then obviously now we know how bad this is for you. We've learned that it's actually harmful to sunbathe all the time. Even then when we get this new information, we will still sometimes have a hard time challenging our current belief. We'll still justify it or excuse it a lot, right? Because people so often prefer a comforting lie than an unpleasant truth. We often tightly hold on to our beliefs and our thoughts, even if they feel outdated or don't make sense anymore or science has proven them wrong, right? People will still be but this is what I believe, this is what I think. People will still stick to their guns. You think about people who are older a lot of the time, half of their opinions. I'm like, sometimes you're like, but that's like actually, that is untrue now. Do you know what I mean? Like, now we know certain things, and it's like, there is this like, no, like this stubbornness to sticking to our guns that I think people have. I think it probably gets worse the older you get, maybe, because the longer you've been stuck in these opinions. Even when we're younger, like, it's just human, I think, sometimes to, if you've really ingrained an opinion or a belief in yourself, sometimes it is just hard to change that, and we would rather just fucking stick to it and be like, I've committed now. Sometimes, even when that's not good, we all do that sometimes. And obviously then, to create psychological consistency, we often dismiss new information, so our identity isn't compromised, right? This is what's interesting. So I did some research and I found an interesting example, right? So this is on thedecisionlab.com. Here's a little scenario for you. Close your eyes. Imagine John. This is about a man called John. John is an avid environmentalist. He is president of the environmental club at school, goes to climate change marches, and even owns an electric car. Wow. One day, John attends a lecture on the negative environmental effects on certain food products, and to his dismay, John learns that coffee processing plants are responsible for water pollution that destroys ecosystems and shrinks biodiversity. His stomach drops. This means he is a part of the problem that he is trying to resolve. This cannot be. It says that. I'm not just a fucking widow. John is an advocate for the environment, but a huge coffee drinker. He doesn't think he can give up his morning brew, let alone convince his friends to do the same. So to get rid of the pit in his stomach and resolve his identity crisis, John quickly concludes that the speaker must not know what they're talking about. He even figures that if coffee isn't great for the environment, he's made so many other efforts to be sustainable that it must even out. So with his mind temporarily at ease, John stops by Starbucks after class for his afternoon pickup. This is cognitive bias at play. We will often either deny or avoid altogether new information that conflicts with our identity when it's convenient to us, right? How fucking interesting is that? Like, I don't know how realistic it is to expect yourself to never contradict yourself, right? Like in this example, if someone's making a fuck ton of effort for the environment, right? Coffee is obviously not great for the environment. He wants a coffee. Is it realistic to expect him to cut out coffee now he's found this out? Or is it valid that like he does enough, right? Because it's still going to cause that like guilt if this is your like moral compass, right? You know, if you're someone who like actively like, you know, loves animals, wants to save animals, wants to do all this, that and the other, and you eat meat, right? It's gonna feel weird to you because you are contradicting your belief system, right? And even though what you're doing, like having a coffee, isn't necessarily a sin, it does contradict your belief system, and that's all that matters. It doesn't need to be a sin, right? It just needs to contradict you. And it's like, I don't know, how realistic is it to, we're never gonna avoid contradicting ourselves ever. Like, to do that, we would need to, every single time we feel cognitive dissonance, change our behaviour, right? Every single time we realise we're doing something that makes us feel like we're contradicting ourselves, or like we're doing something that doesn't align with our beliefs, we would need to change it. Always. We would always need to take that option. We would never excuse ourselves ever. And how realistic is that? Human beings are not perfect, right? I don't know, but either way, this is fascinating. Is there anything else about this? What have I written down? American psychologist Leon Festinger, no idea, the pioneer of cognitive dissonance theory, offers 3 explanations as to why someone might be unwilling to change their existing beliefs or behaviours in light of new conflicting information. I believe I also found this on Decision Lab. 1. The change may be painful or involve loss. Changing our attitudes and actions can be difficult, especially if they're deeply held. 2. The present behaviour may be otherwise satisfying. Think of the smokers who know the negative effects of their habits yet still succumb to the satisfaction of a cigarette. This is what I mean about, like, if it feels good, even if it contradicts your opinions, sometimes you're going to do that, right? That, I do think, is human. I do think, I've made a whole episode about this, haven't I? What was it? I've made an episode about something to do with this. Oh, it's when I was talking about vices and can people live without vices. I read a study then, which is also relevant, I guess, that you know that humans for like the longest amount of time have always been drawn to like the forbidden fruit, the thing that's kind of bad for them, but they want to do it. Like they're tempted by things. Even if something's wrong, sometimes that just makes you want to do it more, right? So even if you are really against smoking, sometimes you're just gonna fucking do it because it like sometimes it feels good to do something that feels wrong, right? It's just, I don't know, people are weird, right? Everything is so complicated. But 3, Making the change may simply not be possible. Even Festinger admits that overwhelming negative emotions in response to change may sometimes not be worth it, which is crazy. So he's admitting that sometimes stress and like discomfort of changing your behaviour to match your beliefs isn't always worth it. Like if you think back to that like John guy, right? He's not real. This is hypothetical. But he wanted a coffee and he's like doing so much right with his life and he's making such a difference and he's doing everything great. Is it worth him cutting out coffee, or like can he just have a fucking coffee? You know, maybe it's not worth it. Maybe he can just enjoy a Starbucks and it's not the end of the world. But then you are still contradicting yourself. Even though it's not the end of the world, it will probably still not feel good to you. And I guess it depends how much that bothers you and how deeply it like uproots you and like fucking bugs you, right? Because if it's making you feel awful, then yeah, maybe stop. But if it's a little bit like, what's it? Then I guess you can maybe let it go. I don't know, it depends. Many of us resolve dissonance by warping our beliefs to align with our bad habits, rather than fixing our bad habits to align with our beliefs. If we continue relying on this unhealthy coping mechanism, we may become subject to hypocrisy, making it difficult for anyone to take us at face value. After all, how can you trust someone who says one thing but does another? This is what I mean by I think it can kind of bleed into your self-esteem and stuff. If it's like done regularly, it can make you feel like a fraud and you feel shame and you feel like there's not really much merit to your beliefs or anything. If you're not following through with them, like often, you know, that's going to make you feel like a bit of a loser, right? And also people might not respect what you say if you're walking around going, you shouldn't smoke and you shouldn't drink and here is why and blah 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 and people shouldn't do this and people should do that, but then you're not doing any of it, or you're like regularly getting caught doing none of that. People won't probably take you seriously or trust what you say, right? It's also annoying, by the way. It's like a whole different point when people are like fucking being like that, like this is what you should do and this is what you should do, blah blah blah. Like I have been like that and oh my god, it's the most annoying fucking trait. Like shut up. I hate when people think they know everything and they like are really on a high horse about their morals and opinions. It's like, think what you want, live by your own morals, that's great, but just do that. Like you don't need to shove it down anyone else's throat, right? I don't know, I just think like it's good to be passionate and to share your thoughts, but like some people do it all the time, and also those people often are the people that fucking like don't necessarily stick to them all the time. Like it's just kind of a facade, right? Let me carry on my paragraph. Remember, actions speak louder than words. There is no point in supporting a theory unless we put it into practice by dedicating intentional effort towards fixing our maladaptive behaviours. We not only become more reliable human beings, but actually help the causes that we claim to support. Again, if you want to stop smoking, you think smoking is bad, like even though you're just one person, if you're going and buying tobacco all the time, like you're part of the problem and the market, right? If no one bought it, no one would fucking smoke. Do you know what I mean? Like there's a market for it because of people like you going and buying it all the time. So, you know, like I said, actually helping the causes that you claim to support is huge. Again, like if you're talking the talk and not walking the walk, you're always going to feel guilt and like inner turmoil for that. And again, that's not a bad thing. It's giving the opportunity to not do that and to tell you that like, hey, something's not matching up here. I just find it so fucking interesting. Like when I was reading about it, there's an example that I didn't write down and I don't know why I didn't, because it was really interesting. But it was about like the government, something to do with the government. This was like an actual thing that happened. This wasn't hypothetical like John. But there was a thing that happened where a government somewhere, this is so vague because I can't remember, a government somewhere had like made a point of like, this country has weapons in it, right? This country, like we need to do something about, they have our weapons or whatever the fuck, something. And obviously the whole country were like, like really taking the side because you believe what the government are telling you, right? And then like a few years later, they'd like investigated the situation. They were like, we were wrong. They didn't have, like, all is well. They didn't have the weapons. We're all good. And half the people of that country like didn't fucking believe their own government because they were given new information, right? That like we've actually looked and we were wrong. Like they admitted that. They said that publicly. And half the people were like, no, they still haven't. They were still like fucking so worked up about it and angry about it, didn't believe it, still hated and thought that this country had, I don't know what fucking country, again. But like, this is what I mean by like, people will have a belief, and even when they're told, like, that's actually wrong, you actually like believed an incorrect source, we made it up, we lied, whatever the fuck, people would often rather just be like, no, I still believe it. Like, I still believe it, than be like, oh shit. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if it's because it's embarrassing maybe to be like, fuck, I believe something I was told and they were wrong and I'm like so gullible, silly little me. Like, I don't know if part of it is like embarrassment and we have like ego issue with being wrong that we would rather just fucking like go along with it and pretend that like, no, it's still true even when it's not, because you can look like an idiot, right? If you're like, oh shit, I was like going around telling everyone that, you know, maybe it's partly that. But I don't know, I just find it so interesting because that's an example of like a bigger like example where a lot of people felt cognitive dissonance, right? But it's just so frequent in like little everyday things. Like if you say you're going to go to the gym 3 times a week and you keep regularly not going and going out and seeing your friends instead, and like excusing yourself and saying like, but I need to have fun, blah blah blah. And sometimes that's the right thing to do. I think sometimes like if you say you're going to do something but you need something else, changing your mind is like, there's nothing wrong with changing your mind, right? But saying you're going to do certain things for yourself all the time and not doing them is, I think, an example still of like this cognitive dissonance in like a smaller scale. You know, even people that are like, oh, fast food is so bad for you, fast food's gross, I would never eat that. Like, and then you get a McDonald's, like, you're gonna feel weird about that. Like, just things like that are small. I guess it's also like a point of like being authentic and like not pretending to be something that you're not is important, because if you were doing that, you're gonna feel uncomfortable about it. You might think it's harmless because no one's gonna fucking know, right? No one's gonna know if I have a McDonald's at my house. You'll know. It will bug you, right? And then you're creating that inner turmoil and that shame and stuff, and that's not something you want to live with, right? You don't want to feel like that. And I guess like not being honest about it and dodging it and excusing it and justifying it all the time is then going to have an effect on things like your self-esteem and like, again, people trusting your word and taking you seriously and like respecting you, I guess. But yeah, I don't know, I just find this fucking interesting, and I've been like reading up about it, and I was like, I need to make an episode about this. Maybe you can think of like ways that you're maybe experiencing this. Sometimes like you don't really notice that you're doing it, or that it's like where it's coming from, and maybe this is like connecting some dots, I don't know. But yeah,